UNRWA is still Hamas, and Hamas is still UNRWA. That is the breaking news that came out yesterday. But we thought it's important to do a show about the most recent news because people really like to forget things, and people forget things, and then what they forget also ends up changing policy. We've talked on this channel about how latest headlines in the past 8 months, we've seen them quickly become policy. So when people realize that UNRWA is Hamas, some countries stopped funding them for a little bit. Then when there was the incident when some so-called humanitarian workers were killed by an IDF strike, an Israeli Air Force strike, some countries reversed that, even though there were gunmen involved, and of course the attack was the right thing to do militarily. So yeah, most recently, four Israeli hostages were the bodies of four Israeli hostages were recovered, and they were recovered in a tunnel. None of this is surprising. We know that many of the hostages are dead. We know that Hamas hides in tunnels. We know that many of the hostages are held in tunnels. Many of them are obviously used as human shields, just like the Palestinian people are used as human shields by Hamas. The news here is that this tunnel, the opening of this tunnel, was in an UNRWA facility. Now, we've seen so much involvement, but you can always say, well, maybe they stole a van, they stole a helmet, whatever UNRWA identification they had could be not really like a tunnel. You have to build it. Like this is the one thing the Palestinians actually build is tunnels. And yeah, if it shows up in your home, in your office, you can't not know it. Remember, UNRWA is the UN, and UNRWA is United Nations. This is your tax money going towards that. Welcome to the reality show, day 231 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Jonathan Morgan, and making his long-awaited return to the reality show, Nicolas Krusek. Nicolas, I'm going to go to you first since you are back after a while.
All right. Well, so as you probably know, UNRWA was founded way back in 1948 to assist the refugees, the Palestinians that had been displaced by the war that was going on there. And it's supposedly it provides relief aid in the form of education, medical care, and other services to Palestinian refugees. I wonder though, in the context of what's going on in that region now, the war that's going on between Israel and Hamas, I think the really fundamental question to ask, and the question that's really burning at the back of my mind, is why does an organization like this even exist? Or why is it active at this period? Think of it this way. Imagine if during World War II, there had been an organization tasked with providing relief to the Germans. Well, but there's lots of innocent German people suffering, there's children dying, there's pregnant mothers dying. It's a humanitarian catastrophe. We have to help these people, we have to provide them with food, clothing, medical care. I wonder how people at the time in the 1940s would have reacted to that. More to the thing like World War II were happening today somewhere in the world, whether people would have the same sort of attitude towards an aggressor nation like Germany that they have towards the Palestinians and Hamas.
I have to just say, Razi, and I think Nicholas's point about I want to put words in your mouth, but the legitimacy of the UN with this straight up evidence in your face. We wake up to find that the hostages that everyone's been looking for are hidden in a UN. It's basically a UN building. This is a UN facility. And Ms. Rand questioned I believe from the get-go, certainly, with China being admitted, et cetera, the legitimacy of the United Nations. We have, some of her quotes, and why we remain a funder and a participant of such these bodies were found in a UN facility. And it's outrageous that any country would continue to to support, to fund this. I don't. Let me see if I actually have the. I don't have the quotes just yet, but you know, this is like perceptual evidence that cannot be ignored. And everyone who says, well, you know, Hamas or the UN is, we have to be part of it. We have to support it. I mean, Rand's vision of calling the UN corrupt from the get-go is bearing fruit now. And it's so apparent. And the fact that these bodies were found in an actual UN facility, what more do you need? And why would you want to be part of such an absolutely vile, corrupt group of dung?
Morgan.
So the specific building where supposedly this tunnel was found, although I haven't been able to find a name for the building, in the reporting around it, it was specifically built, apparently, with funding that was provided for UNRWA by the EU. So explicitly with tax money gathered from the UK and from other European nations. That was how this building was built, and perhaps even that money was used to build this tunnel. And the thing which is strange and extraordinary about people's reaction to UNRWA, since a lot of the allegations about UNRWA have been coming out since October 7th, but really actually over years now, since it's not just that the critics of the UN, like UN Watch, for example, have been discovering terrible, terrible things, which UNRWA has been doing in its schools, for example. This isn't the first time that these things have been coming out. And yet everyone wants to stick their head in the sand and pretend like we don't know anything that UNRWA has been doing, or that there is no evidence about any of this kind of thing. Even just in the last few days, there have been articles published by various left-wing publications in the UK saying that Israel is still failing to substantiate their criticisms of UNRWA with any evidence. And yet, as Jonathan has just said, there's a tremendous piece of evidence right here, a tunnel found in one of their buildings, which was housing the buildings, the bodies of dead hostages.
I mean, it makes them complicit. They're complicit. They're accessories, at least.
Indeed. And this is also on the back of a lot of the EU nations having restored their funding for UNRWA. On the back of a report that was put together, which said that any involvement with Hamas was small and localized and not widespread. And it goes to the way in which I think, because UNRWA is intended to be a charitable organization, which is intended to help people in a humanitarian manner, and so therefore, because it's based on altruism, people, I think, feel a kind of threat to that moral principle that they hold very dearly whenever criticism of UNRWA is alleged. Because how could there be anything wrong with UNRWA? UNRWA is there to protect the underdog. It isn't there to perpetrate crimes. And yet that's exactly what we've discovered that it's been doing. And it's amazing how people will blind themselves to the reality when a threat to their moral code comes up. And that's, I think, what we need to understand is what's going on with people who are avoiding the reality here.
Yeah, this whole idea that there's not that much evidence, and there's only a few people who we know participated in October 7th, celebrated October 7th. It's only a few of them, which, by the way, considering a few of them, enough of them were stupid enough to put it on their public social media, is reason to believe there might be more. But Israel uncovers stuff about UNRWA all the time during this military operation. It's just that it comes from Israel, it is not believed, but when it comes from Hamas, it's of course reported as fact, which is part of what goes on here. And the UN is really the centerpiece of kind of legitimizing it. Christian, thank you for the super chat. Christian says, one of my first childhood memories concerning the United Nations, Kurt Waldheim, one of the best books about this organization, the UN Gang by Pedro San Juan. Kurt Waldheim, of course, was the Secretary General of the UN. He was a Nazi first, then he was a general. You progress throughout your career. First, you join the Nazi Party, then you make it to higher office, and that tells you about the whole idea of what the UN is supposedly for and the method by which it is supposedly going to achieve it, which is impossible as a method. The idea is it is there for world peace, and the way to get to world peace is to have everybody sitting around the table as equals. If you're the United States of America, and if you're Soviet Russia, and presumably if the Nazis were around, them as well. Although even when they weren't around, they were sitting at the table. Yeah, the inevitable result of that, especially in a world where most countries are evil dictatorships, is that the evil dictatorships have a majority and they have an equal vote, one country, one vote, and yeah, you end up with a really morally corrupt, more than anything else, body. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says UNRWA is immoral. Yes, that's putting it mildly. Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, and we have, Miss Rand, we always talk about her being radical, and think about how radical this was when it was written more than 40 years ago. She argued that, and Morgan, as you said, most people want to believe, oh, the UN is good. It's all about, or Razi, like you said, people sitting around, isn't that good? It's for helping people. Rand argued, this is from the Ayn Rand Institute, their great coverage as well. She wrote that the UN is an immoral institution. It sanctions and provides moral cover for evil regimes. And doesn't it? I mean, just the fact you have now all those European countries recognizing Palestine as a state gives that moral legitimacy. And, Razi, to your point, the idea that it's just a matter of vote. Everyone gets a vote and the majority wins. Rand addressed that in the Playboy interview. She said, establishing the notion that the difference between human rights and mass slaughter is merely a difference of political opinion. And isn't that exactly what this is? I mean, we pull these hostages out of a UN facility, and at the same time, this organization is willing to give them not just a seat at the table, but complete legitimacy to anyone who supports them. I mean, if that not is unbelievably corrupt, I can't imagine anything more corrupt.
Yeah, there's that quote. I was just quickly going to say there was that quote. I'm not sure who it was. One of the founding fathers, I believe, who said, "Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner."
Who to snack on first?
Huh?
Who to snack on first?
Yeah, and that's what the UN is. It's the wolves voting on what to do with the lamb. Franklin, Daniel says. Nicolas.
Yeah, and I was going to mention another quote from Rand. I think it's in her article, The Anatomy of Compromise, where the metaphor she uses is, imagine that your town has a crime fighting committee, which has the police and the gangsters sitting side by side, and they all have equal votes. That's basically what the United Nations is like.
Yeah, they're exactly right. Giving them that moral sanction more than anything else. I mean, it's that moral sanction, I believe, that's causing, thousands of students to, stand up and rip up they think they're morally right. People vote and act based on their morality. And, we have some of what has been taught in these UNRWA schools over the years. We have that video we're going to roll at some point, but, just the full legitimacy. And look at the UN. I mean, the building is impressive. It looks almost like a I don't know, like a church, big. And so when all the Gaddafi and all these SOBs stroll in with their procession, it gives them a faux credibility. Like, I wouldn't sit at the same table as emissaries from North Korea or Cuba. Like, I wouldn't share a meal with representatives from Palestine. I wouldn't sit in the same room as them, but we give them all of that credibility simply by having the UN. But I just go back to the fact that they're complicit in these crimes. The hostages were found in UN facilities. It's only a primacy of consciousness that would make anyone want to support such an organization.
Yeah, by the way, church is not the first thing that comes to mind. I look at it, it's like it's a proper Manhattan skyscraper, a bit shorter than the other ones, but still, it's like it belongs in Manhattan. It doesn't belong serving the purpose that it does.
But that grand assembly where they all meet, big, and it's just like it's got this overwhelming elegance and importance, but they've got the worst of the worst sitting there. People that if I ran a hot dog joint, I wouldn't let them come in and eat.
Well, if it wasn't halal hot dogs, they wouldn't show up anyway. Morgan.
Jonathan's right to stress that UNRWA is a UN organization, and so these bodies were discovered being hidden in a UN facility.
What's the UN in UNRWA?
Yeah, And that seems to escape people sometimes because the demands are not being made on someone like Antonio Gutierrez to account for this and to explain it and to resign if this isn't accounted for. And Gutierrez on his social media over the last few months, although he's toned it down a little bit in the last month or so, went on a kind of, I guess you'd say, kind of PR campaign for UNRWA. And there was one of his Instagram posts that I sent to you guys, which is where he was in a school with lots of young women saying that UNRWA is vital for providing education to young women in this region, suggesting that UNRWA, I guess, is, supporting the education of women in an area where women are typically not educated, so appealing to kind of people's humanitarian fuzzy feelings again. But one of the videos that we've got coming up at some point in the show is of some of the other pupils at UNRWA schools and the kind of things that they are indoctrinated into, which is explicit anti-Semitism, explicitly saying that they, as Palestinians, have a right to the land and that the Jewish Israeli population has none. So UNRWA is being branded by UN officials as a lovely, altruistic, charitable organization. So they understand the value of PR. They're appealing to people's moral sentiments, and yet it's inculcating children into abominable, racist, evil beliefs. And I think that's hard for people to get their head around. How could there be such a harsh discordance between what we're told and what they're actually doing? And yet people need to pay attention to reality much more closely than to what people are saying.
You have to wonder what grotesque moral inversion makes it possible for these people to call themselves humanitarians. I mean, if you think about what UNRWA is doing, they're providing relief to the enemy. Hamas is the aggressor in this war. They attacked Israel on October 7th. They're the aggressor. They oppressed their own people. There are Hamas torture chambers. They arrested and imprisoned their own citizens. They mistreat women, homosexuals, all sorts of different groups, minorities. And yet UNRWA is providing relief to the enemies. Again, the parallel that springs immediately to my mind is giving relief to the Nazis during World War II. And I don't think any amount of evidence for the fact that UNRWA is Hamas and Hamas is UNRWA, I don't think it would change many people's minds. I think there would still be the same support, still the same relief and funding coming from the West, no matter how much irrefutable evidence you provide.
Yeah, because people are unfortunately on the side that they're on for moral reasons or the reasons of whatever their ethical viewpoint starting point is, and unfortunately it is the wrong one for so many. You said, Nicolas, the UNRWA is providing relief to the enemy. It's not just that they're providing relief, as we will see in that video soon. They've been indoctrinating children into this. So UNRWA is Hamas not just because of tunnels and because of vans where their terrorists use. It's because they are a part of making sure that when Hamas wants to go on an operation like October 7th, wants to slaughter as many Jews as they can, they have those foot soldiers because UNRWA has indoctrinated them with our money for decades. Thank you, El Rito, for becoming a member. A couple of other points. Morgan, you said, and I think you shared a tweet on our Slack about somebody saying, look, Gutierrez should resign. Gutierrez should not resign. He is perfect for the job. The people who should resign are us. We should leave the UN. America should kick the UN out of the country. Gutierrez is perfect. He is a perfectly evil human being that is the right man to lead this organization into the darkness that they want to lead the world into. And those who don't want us led into that darkness should part ways with the UN.
Razi, may I jump in quickly?
Yeah.
Mike Aurelian, who is a YouTube member, and we all you listening right now, we've got over 130 people watching. You should all become YouTube members. It's a couple pounds a month, and it's supporting truly radical ideas. I mean, these shitheads protesting on college campuses, it's not radical. And, Muhammad Atta and Gaddafi wore the keffiyeh a lot better than you ever will. It's nothing new. Rand is radical. Miss Rand's ideas were radical. And another poster, who I'm not going to mention her name only because she's not a YouTube member, she pointed out that the UN had a moment of silence for the Iranian president this week. FFS, for fuck's sake, of course. And again, Rand truly the radical, pointed this out in her interview with Playboy magazine. And what was that? In the 70s must have been. She said that the notion of protecting rights with Soviet Russia among its protector is an insult to the concept of rights and to the intelligence of any man who is asked to endorse or sanction such an organization. That alone, I mean, it's such a brilliant little note. I mean, it's so efficient in its brilliance. The notion of protecting rights with Soviet Russia amongst its protectors is an insult to the concept of rights. And Razi, to your point, I mean, why we continue to be part of that, we should not. So thank you to Michael for your contribution to all that support our, hopefully, getting these ideas into the culture.
Yeah, and James pointed out that the Playboy interview was in 1964. I don't know the history of the UN well enough to know how many of their different little bodies were formed at that point. UNRWA was had already been around, but yeah, what Rand is saying about generally having Soviet Russia as part of a rights protecting organization is a joke. Today, that joke, by today, it has gone much further with human rights commissions being run by Iran or headed by Iran, women's rights commission being headed by Saudi Arabia. The whole thing is a joke, but it's unfortunately the joke is on us because we're paying for it and we're legitimizing it. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says the UN should move to Iran. No, we already decided. If you were a regular viewer of this channel, you must have heard that we've decided the UN. There's that building in Pyongyang, North Korea, the arrow-shaped building that they built. There was going to be a hotel. Then they realized nobody shows up in North Korea for a vacation, so it's left empty. That is the perfect place for the next UN headquarters. Daniel, should we play
Wait, I'm so sorry, but can I mention one more thing before we move on? I started with Michael's YouTube chat. Michael, who's a member, Michael said it's not a coincidence that the UN looks like a church. They serve the same Machiavellian purpose. I think that is spot on. So thank you, Michael, for the point and for that contribution as well.
And then let's see how they serve that purpose with this video. It's well, it's difficult to watch it in a way because these are children, and these are children who, basically their minds are being corrupted on purpose, again with our money. Daniel.
لأنه نعمل حرب إنه نفرجي اليهود إنه إحنا مش إنه إحنا مش شاطرين، إحنا قوايا كمان. في ناس بحبوا فلسطين بدهم يحاربوا وبضحوا بدمهم عشان فلسطين. أنا بدي أهزمهم بالحرب، بدي أهزمهم.
بيعلمونا إنه الأقصى إلنا وإلنا يعني يعني إلنا فلسطين والأراضي كلها إلنا، لأنهم بسبب كذبهم وانتهاكاتهم إنهم يقولون إنه الهيكل تحت المسجد الأقصى، ولا مرة إنه يكون الهيكل تحت المسجد الأقصى.
أنا بقرأ اليهود.
بعلمونا إن الصهيونية هم أعدائنا وهم أهم إشي لازم يسوي فيهم عملية.
يعني انهم بيعلمونا بالمدرسه انهم ارهابيين
بيحكوا لنا عن اليهود انهم هدول مش منيح وهدول بقتلوا قاعدين بشبابنا. بيحكوا لنا هدول غدارين، وبيحكوا لنا انه هدول بغدرونا، هدول مش منيح. اذا بطعن بدعس عليهم. عمل عمليات. كيف يعني؟ الدعس، عمليات الدعس، عمليات الطعن والاشتباك المسلح في المخيمات.
ايش اكيد هدول العمليات ترفع الراس ولفلسطين. العمليات هاي تاعت الدعس والسكاكين هاي اشي بيرفع الراس لفلسطين.
اذا بدك بطلع بستشهد عادي. انا ان شاء الله اساعد الشباب وان شاء الله اصير مقاوم بالمستقبل مع الدولة الإسلامية.
Yeah, as Daniel points out, some of these are in East Jerusalem, which is technically under Israeli control and actually a part of Israel. It was annexed, so it's officially a part of Israel. Yeah, Nicolas.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of Germany in the 1930s. I mean, they could be wearing brown shirts and swastikas. Quite chilling.
I mean, the students at UNRWA schools, at UN, that's the UN in UNRWA, you know, and it kind of goes back spot on, Nicolas. This is Hitler Youth 2.0, and just kind of reinforcing the importance of Miss Rand's like emphasis on ideas. These kids are taught this at an early age. They're victims in the like shocking juxtaposition of these totally adorable, cute kids spitting out the most vile hatred ideas that they're saying, oh, we were taught to stab and kill Jews. Like now, Razi, you went to school in Israel, I think up until the time you were 13, maybe 12, somewhere around that age, maybe 15. When did you leave Israel?
Yeah, around 15. No, yeah, something like that.
Is that part of what was in your 7-year-old curriculum, that you were supposed to stab and kill the Palestinians, and that was what you were supposed to do?
No, we were
Hand them to the
taught
car?
we were taught that maybe there'll be a peace deal before we are at army age, and we will, there won't be a need for an army, which is, that's a different type of bad, because Israelis are still delusional about actually having a partner for peace, where the Palestinians make it very clear that they don't want peace and all they want is to kill Jews, and they indoctrinate their kids.
They
Like you said,
teach their kids with it, and the UN funds it and makes it possible.
yeah, and Chris says in the chat, asks in the chat, how is it that nothing was ever done? How did the UN, the ICC not do something? Yes, that is the question to ask. And if you can't find an answer, it's time to think, in terms of maybe the people who are funding this and know this is going on and keep funding it and know it's getting worse and worse and then keep funding it more and more. UNRWA is the biggest, UN relief agency for any refugees elsewhere. I think more employees than all others combined. All
This
other agencies
alone
combined.
should disqualify it. Should the evidence we've presented on this show alone?
Yeah, but if it doesn't, when you ask how is this allowed to continue? Well, it tells you something about the people who allow it to continue. Maybe this is what they want. Maybe what I saw in Jeremy Corbyn's announcement today that he's running for British Parliament as an independent because the Labour Party found him to be too anti-Semitic, which is really an achievement, and kicked him out. He said he will continue to fight for something in peace. And Jeremy Corbyn, of course, has been fighting for peace, the peace that he wants for a long time. He on October 7th in the afternoon, when Hamas was pretty much done, after hours of slaughtering Jews, he called for a ceasefire at that point. When Jeremy Corbyn talks about peace, this is the view that governs bodies like the UN. The peace that they actually want is, it's not necessarily unattainable, but the only way to attain it, the only way for war to no longer happen is when tyranny prevails everywhere, and we have some form of tyranny. Some of these pro-tyranny people might be surprised at which type it is, but that is what they're fighting for. They're fighting for Western countries, free countries, to lay down their arms while savages who say they want to slaughter us can do what they really want. Morgan.
The questioner who was asking, how do they get away with this? Well, I think they get away with it in two senses, is that UNRWA seems to have been given a lot of operational independence, some oversight, but not very much. And one story that comes back to my mind all the time about that is Chris Gunnis, who no longer works for UNRWA, but is a guy from the UK who was one of their official spokespeople up until about 2019, wrote a poem in about 2018 or 19, where some Israeli collaborators, quote unquote, in Gaza had been hung by Hamas from the street lamps. And he wrote a poem that he published on his Twitter celebrating that. He wrote a line about how their feet twitch in the air, and it was celebrating it. And he took that down within about 10 minutes because he realized that doesn't look very good. Now, UN Watch thankfully saved it and made a big deal about that. Was he fired for doing that? No, he wasn't. He ended up leaving, but it wasn't because of that. So the people in UNRWA who were, in charge of making, operating it, making their decisions are appalling and wouldn't be, meaningfully looking into things or stopping these kind of Hamas infiltrations, let's say, when they were happening. That's my best guess. But then when they are found out, and when Israel makes a big deal about this, people like Antonio Gutierrez are basically running cover by saying, look, the UN is fuzzy and lovely, they're altruistic, whatever. Don't stop giving them your money so that they can indoctrinate children, as we've just seen. So I think that's how they get away with it.
Yeah.
Now, go on.
No, continue.
Well, the UN, Rand criticized the UN for being fundamentally on a basis of moral neutrality. And that was something that she thought was evil. And she has a great essay about that called The Cult of Moral Greyness. And the UN is an institution of moral greyness. I mean, and just the recent example that you guys mentioned was the fact that they stood up for a minute of silence in respect for the death of Ibrahim Raisi, the butcher of Tehran, unbelievably. The UN ambassador, seems to and ah for a second about whether he stands up, but he still does. So the
US
UN
ambassador, you mean?
The US ambassador, yes. What did I say?
You said UN ambassador. The
Oh,
US
sorry.
ambassador to the UN.
Yes, sorry, the US ambassador. Now, I think there could be a replacement organization for the UN, which could be better, because the whole rationale for their existence is that they're going to create a rules-based international order. I don't think that's a bad thing per se, but given that it's on a basis of moral grayness and of moral neutrality, having the Soviet Union in there from the beginning, as Jonathan showed Rand talking about in the quote, that is something that just corrupts it from the very beginning. And the evil that they then perpetrate because of that just, builds steam over time, to the point that you see organizations like UNRWA doing this kind of thing. I doubt, Hamas didn't exist when UNRWA came about, but UNRWA itself was created on a terrible premise of perpetrating the conflict into further generations, given how they define Palestinian refugees. So the UN needs to be fundamentally uprooted, because so much of it at its basis and at the basis of these various agencies that it has is corrupt. But maybe, I don't know if you guys disagree with this. I think you could have some kind of replacement organization that could do the proper work of creating a rules-based international order far better than the UN has ever done.
Yeah, and one of the things that you would do right away is exclude any country that doesn't respect the basic rights of its own citizens, and you thereby exclude most of the UN, most of the current UN members, but you do make it an organization that actually has the somewhat chance of doing what the UN is supposedly meant to do. There was a point about Gutierrez, I forgot what it was. Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says the UN should move to Iran and North Korea, and I want the current UN facilities in New York as a Congress center for all objectivists and other fans of Ayn Rand around the world. Well, Jonathan, you're in finance. I don't know if you do any foreclosure stuff.
Hotel and conference center. Let's make it a capitalist. It's a great piece of property. We have a lot to do with it, but
yeah.
I'm sorry, Razi, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, it was basically I had a joke to make there, and thank you, Enric, for being a member for 21 months. Enric says authoritarians are effectively using the West morality as a Trojan horse towards defeating us. Yes, and so many of people in the West are already, are buying into it and are on that side. So thank you, PC, for the super chat. Has Jeremy ever called for the release of the hostages? I don't know, actually. I don't know if he fitted in somewhere in paragraph 10 in some Twitter thread. I haven't seen it, but I don't follow him on Twitter and I don't look at his Twitter that closely. What I do know is last time I looked, which was maybe a month or two ago, his tweet from October 17th was still up. October 17th was when misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket fell on the parking lot of Al Ali Hospital, killing a few dozen people. And Hamas immediately said Israel bombed the hospital, 500 people died. Jeremy Corbyn repeated that. The news, it was very quickly proved that this was wrong. Many reported it as news. Many deleted tweets later. Jeremy Corbyn sees no reason to delete that tweet. It should tell you everything you know about him, although the more you know about him, the more each piece of information will tell you everything you know about him. Nicolas.
Yeah, going back to some of the quotes that Jonathan shared about Rand's view of the United Nations, one of the points she makes is that the United Nations is a double evil. On the one hand, it provides a moral sanction and cover to these totalitarian dictatorial regimes, but really it also morally and actually disarms the victims of these regimes. So, for example, all this business about the United Nations standing to commemorate the death of the butcher of Tehran. What message does that send to the citizens of Iran, the ones who actually want to change or overthrow the regime?
Right.
Think about those women and girls the year before who were protesting, trying to stand up for their rights. Why were there no widespread campus protests at that time? Why were there no people speak? I mean, these are real victims, people who are actually being oppressed, unlike the Palestinians who are really responsible for their own problems, having elected Hamas democratically. But why is there no widespread outrage or outcry over all the women in these Islamic countries who are being oppressed and denying their rights? Instead, no, we celebrate a man who is responsible for oppressing them and butchering them.
Yeah, I mean the comparison between the campus protests in the US and the protests in Iran, protesters there risking their lives, sometimes dying for opposing a regime, for opposing tyranny, while people in America are protesting for tyranny and crying about it when people say, well, actually, you're not allowed to do this here, go away, and being gently removed. Thank you, Tricycle Jesus, for both that fabulous name and for becoming a YouTube member. Jonathan.
Yeah, well, we made the point that Hamas is UNRWA, and on a week that a couple videos were released that really, I think people should watch. I mean, one of which is the actual evidence of the soldiers standing next to this tunnel where the hostages were kept, in an UNRWA facility. Then go watch the interview that I guess the Mossad or the IDF did with the terrorist that was caught, who describes very casually raping a hostage. Oh no, first his dad had a turn, and then he and his cousin took a turn, and then they killed this girl. And so then think about just, the fact that the hostages, how these hostages have been kept. And Razi, to your point, the fact that they're being protested in favor of on college campuses around the world just reinforces the importance of ideas, and why I think, the point we're making on this show is that it's truly an evil organization. And the more we perpetuate it, the more we support it, the more we endorse it, the worse and more unsafe we all are. And Rand knew that, and she called it in the 60s. Who did you say? Morgan, you caught the date that Playboy interview was in the 60s. That's even more amazing prescient on Rand's point.
By the way, I mentioned the hospital where a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket fell, and then they blamed Israel and quickly discovered otherwise. So one of our regular pro-Hamas trolls in the chat commented that Israel did bomb that hospital. So that's basically everything that Hamas needs to do. That's Hamas puts something out there. They know it's going to come out. They know that eventually somebody will count the bodies when the war is over, and they'll see a much lower number, but it doesn't matter at that point. It's been put out there. The people who want to believe the savages who committed the atrocities on October 7th will believe them no matter what happens. If the UN if Guterres counts the bodies himself and says that it was 20,000 and 17,000 of them were men of fighting age, it wouldn't matter. They would say that Guterres is an Israeli puppet. So yeah, they throw this stuff out there. The people like that troll in the chat and like Owen Jones will pick it up and will repeat it. And yeah, that's how pro Palestinian propaganda works. Morgan
brought up a point about the protesters at universities and how they don't really care about what they say they care about, because they weren't making a lot of noise or protest in favor of the protesters in Iran. Oh, I think, Nicolas, you said that. And that reminded me, just the people who are going around on Twitter all the time saying that what they care about most are Palestinian children, and who will post pictures like one I saw the other day of a Palestinian boy who had his head squashed between some concrete that had collapsed and the floor really terribly. People will go about saying that they care about those children and their lives most of all. Now, putting aside the logical conclusion that they should want the destruction of Hamas and the end of the conflict to save those children's lives and to save the lives of future children who will die in the conflict if the war goes unfinished, they should also want the destruction of UNRWA. Because if you look at any of those videos, like the one we just played, or many of the other ones that are out there, where the children are explicitly saying, they teach us at school that the Jews are evil, and I want to go stab them, run them over in a car, the land is given to us by God, whatever. The UNRWA schools are inculcating children, indoctrinating children into racist, blood libel myths, whatever, and perpetuating the conflict into the next generation. So whilst UNRWA isn't directly killing the children, although inculcating them into those beliefs is what will inspire them to go out and be martyrs and lead to their death, it's polluting and corrupting their minds. And if you really cared about the lives of those children, you would find that a completely disgusting outrage, and you would not just stick your fingers in your ears when this kind of evidence is produced. Although people will, as you say, Razi, it only takes organizations like this to deny it once, and then people go off on a wild hair chase for months.
But is that, I don't mean to jump in, but is that multiculturalism, the idea that, hey, some people do it some way, some people do it, we're all, it's all good, whatever. If you want to teach your kids to, hate and stab the Jews, that's just the way, is this the influence of multiculturalism that people are on, can't stand and say, wait a minute, this is a completely backward, corrupt culture that I would never support or endorse, and
I don't think specifically on this point it is. I think when you get people saying things about the Palestinian right to self-determination, you can't criticize them for having their Islamic faith or anything like that. I think that is multiculturalism. I think what goes on when they're putting their fingers in their ears regarding the indoctrination of children into, all this anti-Semitism, I think that is just pure evasion. I don't know how to understand it in any other terms than that this would frustrate their belief in the cause that they've committed themselves to, and they won't pay attention to it because it's inconvenient to them. That I can't understand it in any other terms.
Judah Lion Club says, is the next big war going to be between light and darkness? I mean, first of all, I think many would say that they are on the side of light and that the other side are on the side of darkness. And I think, in a sense, we are at a war between light and darkness. The light of freedom, of Western civilization, and the darkness of tyrannical ideas that are unfortunately becoming popular, very popular in the West. Thank you, Donna, for the super chat. Nicolas.
Well, I'm wondering, what exactly is the more monstrous use of our tax dollars? Seeing them go to UNRWA to fund the indoctrination of those adorable young Palestinian children that we saw earlier, or our government-funded universities and colleges, which are teaching their students all sorts of nonsense about colonialism and oppression and the evils of capitalism and the evils of the West. Ultimately, the mentality is the same. What the Palestinian children are learning and what our young people, our young adults are learning, it's really the same ideology. It's the same kind of mentality.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets me back to some of Miss Rand's quotes on Donahue. And I don't know, Razi, we talked about this, immediately in the months after the attack. But, Miss Rand was asked, I think, an impromptu question on the Donahue show, basically about what was happening in the Middle East. And she juxtaposed the true savagery of the Arabs versus Israel, which, even back then, she understood and described as, the modern, Western, innovative, I don't believe she used the term individualist, but the Western force in that part of the world. And when you see, again, this video of this kid describing this rape really has stuck with me this week. It's almost too unbelievably casual the way he describes an act that it made me think of Miss Rand's comment about savagery. Like that is complete savagery. You can't call it animalistic because animals don't act like that, to my knowledge. So
is that your way of asking me to read the exact quote?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's apropos because Rand said that in the 70s and it hasn't changed because the ideas haven't changed. And Nicolas, to your point, those ideas are still being taught. They're being taught and we're paying for it. So the whole system is even more corrupt and more evil. And just knowing the importance of ideas, the fact that these little kids are being taught to hate Jews, to stab Jews, to run them over, and we're paying for it, as they say, FFS.
So this is from FHF, which is a different thing. That's the Forhal Forum, where Ayn Rand spoke annually. This is in 1973. And the question was, what should the United States do about the Arab-Israeli war in 1973? That's the Yom Kippur War. This is part of the answer. So not going to read the first part, but then she says further, why are the Arabs against Israel? This is the main reason I support Israel. The Arabs are one of the least developed cultures. They are still practically nomads. Their culture is primitive and they resent Israel because it's the sole beachhead of modern science and civilization on their continent. When you have civilized men fighting savages, you support the civilized men no matter who they are. It goes on. I recommend people can watch that. I'm sure it's online for free. And of course, you can buy this book where a lot of Rand's answers to questions appear. But yeah, that says it all. Yeah, Arab culture was savage back then. It is savage now. Even in places like Dubai that look super Western, they still have, we've talked about how in Dubai, Western women on some occasions who went to Dubai on holiday because they saw it as a nice place as it's presented to Westerners, were raped, went to the police to report that they had been raped, and were arrested for that because they had sex outside of wedlock, which is a crime for a woman in Dubai, even if she did not consent. And again, Dubai, with that being said, of course, homosexuality is illegal. With that being said, is truly one of the better places in the Middle East, which says it all. So yeah, Rand was right then. And by the way, the worst of the cultures in the Middle East, the worst of the Arab cultures is Palestinian culture, which is purely built for the murder of Jews. So yeah, she was correct then. She's correct now, and if we don't realize that, we will pay as we are paying. I don't remember who went last.
Yeah, I mean, Razi, I've been to Israel 3 times, been nowhere else in the Middle East, and have nowhere else to go. I mean, I wouldn't feel safe walking around any other country in the Middle East, to my knowledge. And you said, "Wow, how can you be so harsh and call them savages?" And it's 2024. Like, what is wrong with you that someone can't come for a weekend and feel safe necessarily? And given, as you said, the culture where homosexuality is banned, that alone says it all. But because we've gone down the list, there's plenty to talk about. But I consider it a backward culture, and I consider Israel a modern culture, a first world culture. Its economics reflect that, and the fact there's so much sympathy and empathy for such an ugly, corrupt, backward culture to this day, I don't understand. And one that breeds these young men and women with the goal of going out and killing Jews. What kind of is that a culture to be respected?
Well,
Yeah.
one image that sticks in my mind from some of the clips that I've seen from the campus protests in recent weeks. I forget exactly which U.S. university was, but they were all the Palestinian flags, and there were flags in support of Gaza, and there was one flag that it was something like "Gays for Palestine" or "LGBT students for Palestine." Really? Really? How can these people be quite so blind and ignorant as to not know that they would be put to death immediately in any one of these Arab countries?
It's not just a sign. This is a movement that is widespread. You see them in the protests in the UK. You see them in all these protests. We saw this around Eurovision, the song contest in Europe that is popular among the gay community. Many boycotted it because Israel was allowed to participate. It was yeah, this is very widespread, and yeah, when some of them are asked, some of the participants in this Gays for Palestine or LGBTQ plus for Palestine are asked about this, they say, well, there's homophobia everywhere. So yeah, they get away with it in their own minds, like they have to get away with a lot to support the Palestinians, whether or not they're gay.
I mean, that's it. And like Israel, Razi, to your point earlier, Israel teaches its young people to be, real education, by and large, teaches them to grow up, be productive, be in industry. And that's why Israel is a thriving economy. And, Nicolas, to your point, these ideas that are being taught to these young kids, they're victims. They're terrible victims. But the fact that we're supporting it, paying for it, is going to perpetuate it for another 40 years after Rand's Playboy interview, or 30 years after the Donahue interview, or 20 years after that publication was published. The ideas move the world. This is what Rand taught us. Rand taught me. And until these ideas change, and it feels like, in fact, it's not that the ideas are changing, they're now getting even moral support from American university students who would be put to death the first moment they set foot in Gaza. Razi, you once said to me something on America. You asked people who say they hate America, have you ever been there? Is that right? Am I remembering that?
What? Sorry.
Remember our trip around Europe about our Americanism book. Your counter to people who say that they hate America, you would ask them, had they ever been there? Or am I remembering that correctly?
I don't remember that, but sounds plausible.
All the sympathy for Palestine among American college students, my sense would be, go there, take a trip, go check it out.
Yeah, by the way, we actually have a pro-Hamas troll in the chat, says, well, can gay people get married in Israel? Remember, this is what they say in defense of a culture where you get executed if you're gay. In Israel, by the way, secular people can't get. I can't get married. I couldn't get married in Israel because because they have a law where it's only religious weddings, which is unfortunate, of all religions, unlike elsewhere in the Middle East, and they recognize your marriage if you get married elsewhere in a civil ceremony. So, but yeah, the idea that this is somehow
isn't Tel Aviv have an enormous pride celebration for year?
Yeah. Morgan, any comments before we go to that other video, which we were thinking about doing a show about a week or so ago and never got around to it, but it's UNRWA related. Morgan.
Well, we were talking just a little while ago about the international reaction to these kind of things. And maybe it was coming up in connection to the college protest. I don't know how you guys view it, but I view a lot of the public, even a lot of the kind of news reading educated public, as tremendously shallow in their response to the conflict in Israel and to a lot of these international kind of crises, because they don't pay attention to them for a lot of the time, which is understandable because it's not like necessarily their job to do that, and they're under no duty to go and pay attention to every kind of dire situation in the world. But they don't pay attention to these things for a long time. Some crisis breaks out, and then they pontificate and state their beliefs on them as if they're tremendously well informed about them. And that means that really what they'll do is they'll read a couple of articles which are corrupt from The Guardian or the New York Times or something like that, and then form their whole viewpoint of a conflict, which is 75 years old, something like that, on the basis of those kind of things. And I think something needs to be get across to people, which is that if you don't know something, you don't have to go out and make a declaration about it, except that for university students in the US and the UK, that's exactly what they're encouraged and taught to do. They're taught to go out and protest. And actually, when you see some of the interviews of the students at the protest, they know precious little about what they're there for. They just know that they should be there.
Thank you, Zion, for the super chat. Zion says, happy to see the channel growing. Thank you. And thanks for supporting its growth. Should we watch that clip of the UNRWA van, the UNRWA van and UNRWA's friends around the van?
Unbelievable. Actually, very believable.
Yeah, all right. I think we get it. Yeah, and the thing with this video is, really, what's the big deal? It's just, friends hanging out. And that's what it is. It is a big deal, but remember this and the vast amount of evidence that there is about UNRWA in multiple places, multiple incidents, collaborating with Hamas, and then listen to the stuff that comes from the UN, from Francesca Albanese, who says there's a genocide against the Palestinians right after they slaughter over 1,000 Israelis. When Gutierrez, days after the slaughter, days after the massacre, says, what was it that he said? This didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened after decades of occupation. Immediately, Gutierrez went to the defense of the savages. Immediately. And remember this, not just in the context of UNRWA. Remember, this is what the United Nations is. If you want to see a world run by people like those gunmen, like the savages who did what we showed yesterday on the reality show, did what they did to those girls, did what they did to whoever they could on October 7th, then you should support the UN if that's the world you want. And that is not the world we want here on the Ayn Rand Center UK. So we will continue to talk about it and shed light on it wherever we can. And of course, we encourage you to support our work by what you can do for free is to comment. That helps with the algorithm. Like the show, share it, subscribe if you're not subscribed. And if you're able to do so, consider becoming a paying member. You have access to, at every level, additional hours of content every week. And of course, you continue to support our continued work by doing so. Any final comments on what we've talked about today, Nicolas?
Just one. I agree with what Rand said from the very beginning, that the UN can't be changed. It can't be reformed. It's evil by its very nature. All free countries, all civilized countries should defund it, withdraw from it, and ultimately the agency should be scrapped entirely.
I agree. Morgan?
Just that people act like the UN is a fact of nature, and the world didn't come into existence with the United Nations headquarters planted in Manhattan Island. So it came to be at a certain time after the Second World War, and it can go out of existence as well. And so people just need to stop treating it like it's a permanent fixture when actually it's a blight upon the world, which could be got rid of.
Jonathan?
Yeah, Rand talked a lot about the sanction of the victim. And, this just seems to be another great example of that. I mean, evil is impotent other than the power that we give it, and we're literally paying for it. So when I see those UN Jeeps or trucks, I think, gee, I've needed a new car for a number of years now. I'm paying for those cars. We're literally purchasing the evil, funding the evil, and endorsing the ideas, teaching the ideas. And that's why it's going to continue until that changes.
All right, we are out of time, and we do have a video premiering on our sister channel, The Briefly Objective. But just very quickly, Nicolas, where can people find more of your work?
Well, if you're coming to OCON, I'm going to be giving a talk, so I'll put in a plug for that. I'm going to be speaking on the Tuesday after the weekend, the Tuesday morning. So if you're going to be there live, please come up and say hello. I look forward to seeing many of the viewers of this channel live in Anaheim, and please do come to my talk on the Tuesday morning.
Nice. I think all three of us with you here on the panel are coming to OCON, so we will come by and say hi and come to your lecture. Morgan?
You can find me at Morgan Carter 98 on Twitter, and you can also find me on Substack. Both of those are linked in the description.
Jonathan?
Miss Rand is known for her philosophy and her political commentary. She loved cats passionately, and Dr. Peikoff, her number one student, loved dogs. And I was able to work with Dr. Peikoff on this new book, Can You Really Love a Dog? Leonard Peikoff and Ayn Rand on Pets. It's all about the philosophy behind our relationship with our animals. So check it out. It's on Amazon and Dr. Peikoff's latest original work.
I'm Razi Ginzberg on X. Pro-Hamas Campus Intifada. That video is already premiering on our sister channel, The Briefly Objective. Watch that and share it and like it as well, and subscribe to that channel. We are getting closer to those 1,000 subscribers there. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Objective.